Right then guys, it's PSL here, and after a 3-month gap, I'm finally back with another episode in my Power Stages series on Dirt 4. It's been a while since the last video, but in that, I was looking at the H3 cars, and it was extremely close, but the Renault 5 Turbo just about beat the Lancia Stratos by less than a quarter of a second. In fact, both of those cars are right up there with some of the quickest cars we've seen in this series so far. But we've got some very quick cars still to come this series, including the Group A cars in this very video. Some of the more iconic rally cars are here, including the Lancia Delta Integrale and Colin McRae's only championship winning car, the first edition Subaru Impreza. Now the annoying thing from my perspective is that the two most familiar rally cars here, which for me at least is the Impreza and the Evo, are also the two that in theory should be the slowest. They both have 300 horsepower and both weigh 2,711 pounds, or roughly 1.2 tonnes. Compared to those is the Ford Escort, which is a few years older than the Impreza and Evo, but it has 10 more horsepower and weighs a fraction lighter than the pair of them. Then there's the Lancia Delta, which has 330 horsepower, 30 more than the Impreza and Evo, and the Delta also weighs 300 pounds or over 0.1 tonnes less than the more modern pair of Group A rally cars. So the pecking order has been pretty plainly established just by the car's crib sheets, except for that age-old battle between the Impreza and the Evo. In fact, I've already gone through this in a previous episode with the NR4/R4 cars, where there the Mitsubishi Evo 10 was a good 2.6 seconds quicker than the NR4 Impreza. On the face of it, you might assume it would be the same case here, given that after Colin McRae won the World Rally Championship in 1995, Tommy Mäkinen won 4 straight championships in a series of Mitsubishi Evos. The Evo 6, which is in this game, is the last one that he won a championship in. So looking at my time around Kangaroo Farm with the Evo, and first of all you'll notice how I approached the first real braking zone on the stage. Notice that I'm sideways quite a bit before the corner. I'd love to say that was brilliant foresight and intuitive driving on my part, but it wasn't. That was the rear brakes locking up and slowing the back of the car to where the front is, which I was able to control and it did work out nicely, but that is the car's biggest issue: confidence under braking. The rears lock up so easily that I had so many failed attempts at a clean run just due to the back overtaking the front, and by then it's game over. There's also a small amount of understeer, but honestly, that is by no means the main concern. In fact, at another one of the stage's hairpins, you can see me brake gradually and way before the corner to prevent the rears locking up, and then I have a bit of trouble turning the car around the corner itself. So therein lies both of the car's issues in just a few seconds. Simply put, the back feels as if it's made of helium, whilst the front feels as if it's made from lead. It's not a tricky car to drive by any means, but the tendency for the rears to lock up, and when they do, it can be disastrous, cost it precious time. In the end though, its stage time was a competitive 2 minutes and 58.629 seconds, which is one of the quickest times in this series to date, and is 0.2 of a second quicker than this car's later evolution, the NR4 Evo 10. So how does it compare to McRae's Impreza? Well, the Scooby doesn't have the same braking issues that the Evo does, which instantly makes it easier to drive and quicker in the braking zones. There's still a small amount of understeer and a small amount of power on oversteer, but then again, a 300 horsepower front engine sedan car is going to have those slight handling issues regardless of whether it's 4-wheel drive or not. There's nothing to choose between these two cars in terms of handling. Under braking, the Subaru has the advantage, but more important than that is a car's performance at getting up to speed in the first place. As always, I compared the acceleration of all the cars by timing how long it takes them to get to the bridge from the start line. The Impreza got there in 10.399 seconds. The Evo was 3.5 tenths of a second quicker at getting there, as it was just over the 10-second mark. But not only is the Impreza slightly slower in that scenario, but exiting some hairpins there is a noticeable, albeit brief, turbo lag if you let the revs drop too low or if you're in too high of a gear. It's tough to choose between these two. The Impreza is more stable and predictable, even if it's a bit leisurely getting up to speed at times. But then again, the Mitsubishi Evo's brake bias is so weighted towards the rear that at times it can be so wild entering corners that it may as well have rear wheel steering. But all you really need to know is that the Impreza won the World Rally Championship in 1995, and the Mitsubishi Evolutions won 4 straight championships, with this particular one, the Evo 6, being the final iteration. Logically, the 1999 championship winning car is going to be quicker than the 1995 one, and it was, as the Impreza couldn't even set a sub 3 minute stage time, although it was only 69 thousandths of a second off, so it was incredibly close. So this time Mitsubishi won the age-old Evo vs Impreza battle, and they won it by a margin of 1.4 seconds. Now I'm about to contradict myself, as literally only a matter of seconds ago I said that logically the 1999 championship winning car is going to be, and factually just is, quicker than the 1995 championship winning car. Well, so much for automotive development, because these two cars from the early 1990s are statistically quicker. First off, there's the 1993 Ford Escort, which weighs a fraction less than the Impreza and Evo, and has 10 more horsepower to boot than the pair of them. Then there's the 1992 Lancia Delta Integrale, the oldest car here and Lancia's last hurrah in world rallying. And it was good enough to see Lancia win the 1992 Manufacturers' Championship. Not only that, but the Delta is the most powerful car here, with 330 horsepower, which is 20 more than the Escort and 30 more than the Impreza and Evo. Finally, the Delta is by far and away the lightest car here, as it weighs just under 300 pounds or 0.13 tons less than the Impreza, Evo and Escort. The Delta isn't just the quickest on paper, because on the run from the start line to the bridge, it's the only car of the 4 to have gotten there in under 10 seconds, with a time of 9.682 seconds. The Ford Escort was a bit slower, unsurprisingly considering it's heavier and less powerful, and it did it in a time of 10.332 seconds. That's actually about 0.3 of a second slower than the Mitsubishi Evo, and it's only nominally quicker than the Impreza. But how do the Ford Escort and Lancia Delta feel to drive? Well, let's start off with the car that theoretically should be the quickest of the bunch by far, the Lancia Delta Integrale.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Thanks again, Nicky, and away we go. And look at how quickly this Delta has accelerated, already way over 70 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour. You would not think that this car is driving on gravel right now. That's how quickly it accelerates. And going down this start straight over all the bumps and jumps, it's looking composed, controlled. Yes, surprisingly so, actually, bearing in mind that this car comes from the early 90s. This is just after the fall of the Group B era, and the Group B era was wild and frantic and too much horsepower, and actually, well, I went a bit too wild into that first real braking zone there, that hairpin. But no, this Lancia Delta, honestly, surprisingly easy to drive. You can perfectly understand why this car won the Manufacturers' Championship, and what a way for Lancia to bow out of World Rallying, the most successful mark in World Rallying, and there's no surprise why, really, because, I mean, we've certainly driven one Lancia earlier on in this series, the Lancia Fulvia, and that was actually the slowest car in this series to date, and it probably will end up being so, actually. But going back to the point, this Lancia Delta, honestly, it's a very quick accelerating car. You can see as I'm going around the corners, there's been no hint of understeer, no real oversteer. I went a bit, wild into the first real braking zone, but, I mean, it just is perfectly balanced. Honestly, it's difficult to talk about this car for 3 minutes, because normally I'll pick up some kind of negative, and there just isn't one. I went a bit wide there, but then again, that was an off-camber corner, which I didn't approach particularly well. But it's amazing, to be honest, bearing in mind this is from the early 90s, as I said, just after the Group B era, 330 horsepower, and it's so easy to drive. Unlike the Impreza and the Evo had a slight amount of understeer, not much. I mean, but just a slight amount. It was noticeable. It isn't noticeable here. There's no real power on oversteer, no more than you would expect, bearing in mind we're driving on gravel. There's no understeer. It's easy to drive. It's chuckable and wild, yet controllable. And that is exactly what you want from a rally car. Chuckable, but controllable. And that's exactly what this car is. And we're into the final split now. I'm way ahead of Alvarez. Crucially, we just need to find out what time it sets, and on 2 wheels there. I think that's the very definition of this car. It's wild, it's frantic, it's quick, but it's controllable, and quite frankly, everything turns out fine in this car. And, well, we've just got one real corner left to go. There's a lot of runoff heading into this final left-hander, so we could go wild into here, but no, actually, I took it quite slowly and cautiously, but we're coming up to the line. And this is looking like it's going to be a very quick time. That is 2 minutes 50.4. A very quick time, but as I said, this car, it's difficult to find any negatives with it. And quite frankly, it's quick and it's fun to drive. And there's, honestly, well, it's not difficult to drive at all, which is brilliant. So there you have it. 2 minutes and 50.478 seconds. That makes this car the 4th quickest car I've driven in this series to date, and it's even quicker than the light, small, powerful and modern Ford Fiesta R5. So the Lancia's already topped one Ford today, but can it also beat the 1993 Ford Escort? The Escort is 1 year newer than the Delta, but it's less powerful and heavier, so it would be one heck of a turn up for the books if this forgettable Ford Escort toppled the 1992 championship winning Lancia Delta.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Thanks again, Nicky, and away we go. And instantly you can tell that the Escort isn't quite as rapid in accelerating as the Lancia Delta, although it is already up to the bridge, across it, over it, and we're heading up towards the bumpy start straight. So this is a good test of a car's suspension, and again soaking up the bumps quite well. With the front lifted up there, that was slightly worrying, but actually it took that very controlled. It was very stable, actually even more stable than the Lancia. Slight locking up of the brakes there, but unlike the Evo, very controllable, and yeah, sorted that out quickly, easily, no mess. Now this Ford Escort, the way to describe it is, simply put, is a Diet Delta. That's exactly it. It is a Lancia Delta, but not as good. Because, well, I mean, the Lancia Delta, as I've already said, it's, you know, perfectly balanced. There's not a hint of understeer or oversteer, and all of those positive traits can be passed over to the Escort. I mean, you're looking at it now, and it's not, well, actually, okay, it's not particularly quick up that hill there, but you look at it, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's no understeer there, no oversteer, not really. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with this car. And if the Lancia Delta wasn't in this category, this would be the best car by far. But the fact is it's everything that the Delta is, but slightly less, slightly watered down. Even around that corner, actually I took that corner a little bit better in the Escort than I did in the Delta. But yeah, that, simply put, it's a Diet Delta, a Diet Lancia Delta. The Ford Escort, I mean, the Lancia Delta won the 1992 championship. This car didn't even win the 93 World Championship. It came second in the Manufacturers' Championship. It was actually Toyota that won. Surprisingly, I'm not quite sure why the Toyota Celica isn't in this game, because it is an iconic rally car in its own right. But either way, the Toyota Celica isn't in here, and the Ford Escort is. But yeah, the Ford Escort, it's not a championship winning car. That's why I described it as forgettable, because I mean, it didn't win a championship. It's, I mean, okay, we're beating Alvarez. Alvarez set a time, I think, of 2 minutes 56, but I'm not really too concerned about that. I'm beating Alvarez, but will I beat the Lancia Delta? I've described it as a Diet Delta, but there's no real issue with that, because the Lancia Delta is brilliant, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it is incredibly easy to drive, and the same can be said here. So the Ford Escort, it's got a slight power disadvantage, but apart from that, that's really it. So it could actually be incredibly close. And let's not forget, it is 1 year newer, so it's got 1 year's more development on the Lancia Delta, but no, it is slower, but only by about 2 seconds. So the Ford Escort, it came second in the 1993 World Rally Championship. Lancia, well, the Lancia Delta was competing, it was only a privateer car, but evidently, judging by this, a privateer-run Delta would have been quicker than a works Ford Escort. In the end, the Ford Escort was 2.1 seconds slower than the Lancia Delta Integrale. Hardly a surprise given the heritage and success of the Lancia Delta and of Lancia as a whole in world rallying. Also, you could just look at the car's crib sheets and work out within a few seconds that the Lancia is the quickest and the Ford Escort is the second quickest, and then it's just a toss-up between the Impreza and the Evo. But those crib sheets did not prepare me for the fact that the Lancia Delta, as it stands, is the 4th quickest car in this series and is just ahead of the R5 Ford Fiesta. And those R5 cars were sublime. And for the Lancia Delta to be made in 1992 to be quicker than the modern day R5 Ford Fiesta, that's an achievement and a half. Next up is the Ford Escort in 6th place with the Mitsubishi Evo 6 5 positions further down the field, as it was 6 seconds slower over the course of the whole stage around Kangaroo Farm. Finally, on the second page, in 14th place is Colin McRae's 1995 championship winning Impreza, which staggeringly was slower, albeit by only 0.2 of a second, than a Fiat 131 from the 1970s. So that's pretty much it. The Mitsubishi Evo 6 beat the 1995 first edition Impreza, and the Lancia Delta has proven itself to be an extremely quick car. I knew it was quick, but I didn't expect it to be that high up. But we've still got the Noughties rally cars, as well as both the rear-wheel drive and front-wheel drive Group B cars left to go. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see the Lancia Delta slip from 4th place, and to see something go quicker than even the current top time of a 2 minute 47.5.